I'm supporting local business, okay?
Good morning, young lady. How are you? Very good, thank you. Jeff, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. How's the snow? How's it going?
Testing soon. Testing soon. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
Morning, Steve.
Yes,
Testing.
it's supposed to be giving the treasurer's report. We didn't do that until the agenda was out, so,
Morning, Max.
Testing.
and I haven't seen Jean yet.
Testing.
Oh, yes. Good old Uncle Larry.
Testing 1, 2.
I wish I had his cash. That would be good. You see him on all of Hawaiian Islands.
Testing 1, 2.
$900 million. Showing that Hawaiian Islands.
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing. Testing. Oh, the other ones? Table marks?
Not with me.
Oh, I'm talking right into a mic. And mic. Hello? Testing. 1, 2.
Show you mind mapping. You guys.
I'm backed off. Testing 1, 2.
Just watch my cord behind you, so you don't hit it.
Oh, so I don't need to plug in, I tried to plug out, but I'm good.
Table mic.
Is anybody actually doing that last time? Thanks.
I got one.
This is the mic. Testing 1, 2.
Here's the proof. Just throw, we're ready. We're ready after the meeting. Hey, Frank.
I'm the one that's sick.
Excellent. Yes. That's awesome.
Should we kick
I
off?
love
the-
it. Yeah, that's perfect.
This is table mic.
For that part. The holiday cheer.
There we go. Word that drinks together stays together. Yeah.
Testing, table mic. Testing, table mic. Testing, table mic.
Now, Steve, you know me, I never do say things the right way I'm supposed to say, it's just say it for me, but now.
Don't count on me.
All right, don't let anybody jump in.
Got a couple rookies here.
Okay, because I'm just like, I know I'm not saying, that's what I always say, just say what you want me to say.
Yeah.
Hear that?
Okay.
This is called.
Testing hand mic. Hand mic. Testing. Say hello, Michelle.
Hi, Charlie.
There you go. Wait 30 seconds. Morning.
information.
Here we go.
Yeah, the room sounds good. Testing. Right, I know.
Love you, Tester. How are you?
Good morning, Esther. How you doing?
How about that?
Wonderful. You're coming through loud and clear.
Charlie, you okay?
Charlie, you good in the back?
We good?
Good.
Our first order of business is to approval of the agenda. Any comments or?
I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to add two things. One thing would be an appointment, And then I think Esther has something.
Yeah, amendment to go into closed session after the open session.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
All right, any discussion? The second one is to add a closed session meeting at the end of this meeting,
Personnel.
personnel issue. Okay, everybody in favor, we'll put those in, the appointment will come in the regular appointments, and the other one will be at the end of the meeting, so all in favor of adjusting the agenda?
Aye.
Okay, great. Oh yeah, thanks Doug. All right, we need to approve the minutes. I think you all had copies.
Change the
Oh, yes, sorry. The treasurer's report will be by Jean today rather than John. So to correct that on the agenda. All right, approval of minutes. Any comments on the minutes? Questions, concerns?
I move for approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Okay, Doug Parks. President's comments.
And I'd rather deliver things in person than over a loudspeaker, so thank you for please move on to the next topic.
All right, we will move to the treasurer's report from Jean Wingstop.
Good morning, everyone, and I hope everybody had enjoyed their Thanksgiving holiday. As a friend of mine always says to me, I hope you gobbled till you wobbled. So, I'm your association's assistant treasurer, John. I work closely with John Viola, who is on vacation now. So I will be discussing the results for the month, the results for the 6-month period, and believe it or not, we're halfway through the fiscal year now. The status of our cash position, the status of our reserves, and a new report at the end, which will be a forecast for the year ending in April, for this fiscal year ending in April 2019. I can make the copies. I don't have them here. For the month of October, we had a favorable variance, $28,600 before expenditures for new capital. We had revenues over budget of $34,900 and expenses over budget, $6,300. So a net favorable balance of 28.6. On the next slide, thank you. We, as you know, when we buy new capital, which is defined as items that capital items we acquire that have never functionally existed before in Ocean Pines, we don't fund them out of replacement reserves because the item is not being replaced. It's a new capital item. We fund them out of the operating budget. And during the month, we spent $5,800 for, or at least we got charges in October of $5,800 for finishing the new platform tennis court. So the total net operating change after transferring, after spending that money is the net operating change is $22,800. We can go to the next slide. This, I will talk now about the revenue variation. You can see that we had actual revenues of $396,558 versus the budget of $361,666 for a positive revenue variance of $34,892. The principal impacts come from the increase in revenue at the yacht club of $47,000, $47,438, that was partially offset, though, by golf, which had a negative variance for their revenue for the month of $12,945. And I talked with our golf pro, John Malinowski. He said that golf was primarily, the negative revenue was primarily the cause of 11 days of rain, 6 during the month were very measurable rain. Several days, he said, were very heavy because if you recall, we had the remnants of the Hurricane Michael. Even though it was a tropical storm when it got to our area, it still dumped quite a bit of rain on the course, which affected the amount of play for the month. And it's a reminder, though, that many of our amenities, if not most of our amenities, in fact, are weather dependent and weather related. And it's just natural now that golf operations from here on out until the spring are going to be affected by cold temperatures. Personally, I always shoot between 50 and 90 on the golf course, but that's not my score, that's the temperatures. So if it drops below 50, I'm not prone to playing golf. Thank you. This is the expense variation for the month of October, and there's 2 pieces to this. We had an unfavorable expense variation of $6,263. You can see we spent $8,833 versus the budget of $877,662. First, I'll talk about the unfavorable items. There was general administration. Their expenses were over budget by $21,789. And that was primarily the result of IT service contract expenditures of $12,909 above budget, and a bad debt expense of $3,745 above budget. The yacht club had also an unfavorable expense over budget of $23,670, but that was that is really related to wages and service supplies consumed that were related to the increase in the sales that we discussed on the previous slide when we were looking at the revenues. We sold, the yacht club had $46,592 more revenues during the month, but it also consumed more food and had to pay more wages to produce those sales. Next slide, please. Talking about the variance of the unfavorable variance for expenses, these are the favorable items that affected the variance. First, we had police. The police department their expenses were $15,945 below budget, and this was primarily due to wages being $21,181 below budget, and I was told that this is still due to an open position in the police department that was not filled in October. And also their service, that was slightly offset by their services and supplies line item, which had $3,913 more than budget. But net, they were $15,945 below budget for their expenses. Aquatics also had a favorable variance in expenses below budget of $13,317, primarily due to wages were $15,556 below what was budgeted, but their maintenance cost was $2,100 above their variance, above their budget, so the net of those gets you close to the 13. I'm just pointing out the major items, not every line item, because we could be here until next Thursday. And Recs and Parks had a $10,079 favorable variance, and the primary reason for that was they had wages at $9,563 below the budget. In total, then, these favorable items that I pointed out were roughly $39,000. That was the favorable items, and if you recall the previous slide, I was talking about 45,000 unfavorable items. And so take 39 away from 45, you got 6,000 unfavorable variance. Next slide. This, we're now talking about the summary of everything, put it all together for the month of October, and I got two parts. First of all, we had a favorable variance of $29,000, and the highlights from the non-amenity departments are that the police department had a favorable variance at the bottom line of $24,000. Their expenses were $16,000 below budget, and we discussed that as primarily that open position, and they had miscellaneous revenue of $8,000 above budget. So both of those added together, you had more revenue and less expenses, give you their total favorable variance for the month of $24,000. The general administration had general administration department had an unfavorable variance of $24,000, and that was primarily because their expenses were above budget by about $21,000. And in that in detail, above the 21, their expenses are being above the budget by $21,000. They had it was the contract IT services. They were above budget by $13,000, and I think we mentioned that earlier. They had bad debt expense above budget by about $4,000, and other costs, miscellaneous costs that were above budget by $3,000. So we had $13,000 in IT costs above budget, $4,000 in bad debt expense at $17,000, and $3,000 of other costs. So I've explained most of the $21,000 of expenses that were above budget. But additionally, general administration had revenues below $2,000. So that contributed to the $24,000 total of unfavorable result for the month by the general administration department. And being an accountant, I can tell you that in the non-entity department highlights I've shown, and that you have to be a CPA to understand this. If you have one that's favorable at $24,000 and the other unfavorable at $24,000, the total for that page is zero. But you can't do that unless you're a CPA, which usually stands for can't perform additions. I didn't know if you knew that. But anyway, on to the next page. This is still, we're talking about the summary for the month of October. And this is all your amenities. Again, we're talking about a total overall favorable result for the month of October of $29,000 on the bottom line. The amenities highlights are the yacht club had a total favorable result for October, 26,000. They had revenues that were 46,000 above budget, and we had to spend $21,000 more than budgeted in expenses to get that revenue. The aquatics was favorable by 16,000. That was primarily driven by reduction in their budgeted labor costs for the month of 15,000, and they're slightly offset. They also had revenue above a budget of about $2,000. But nonetheless, they ended up the month at it did end up the month at favorable $16,000. Golf was unfavorable by 10,000. I rounded all these off to the nearest thousand. Golf was unfavorable by $10,000. Their revenues were below budget by 13. As we explained, a lot of that was weather related, and but that was partly offset by expenses also being below budget by $3,000. And all your other association amenities, when you added up their total results for the month, they were netted out to 1,000 unfavorable. So we get over on this page, we have a total of $31,000 in favorable bottom line for the amenities for the month. Of course, that was offset by a couple of other items that were unfavorable that I didn't mention. The previous page we were at 0, but that gives you a picture of how the favorable $29,000 result was accomplished. And again, I rounded all these numbers off to the nearest thousand. Next slide, please. Now we jump into, from the results for the month to the year-to-date results for the 6-month period ending October 31st. And these represent the excess of revenues over expenses versus the budget. And for the month, we had a total favorable variance. In other words, we had $118,000 not for the month, for the 6-month period, we had a favorable variance of $118,000. And that's for the first 6 months. And that's the first half a year of this fiscal year is represented in these numbers. We're already into the second half of our fiscal year, which ends in April 2019. I'm showing on this page some of the unfavorable variances, and I have another page, part 202, that will show the favorable variances that resulted in the $118,000 net. The unfavorable, some of the bigger unfavorable items here are the General Administration Department was $96,000 over budget in their expenses. And this was being driven by, again, we're talking about year-to-date results for the 6 months, $70,000 in IT contract services over budget, and legal fees of about $40,000 over budget. So that explains, and some of that was offset, but that'll give you the major impacts of bringing that resulted in $96,000 over budget. The aquatics had a $69,000 unfavorable variance for the 6 months. And this was caused primarily by the issuance this year of the parking-only passes sold for this fiscal year, where there were no swimming privileges attached to them. So there was consequently no revenue transfer for those parking-only passes, which there were a lot of, transferred. There was no revenues transferred from beach parking to aquatics. But we also have, and I want you to try to remember that $69,000 unfavorable variance, because when we show in the forecast, which will be for the year, which will be at the end of the presentation, that number will drop. It'll be about $29,000 based on our estimates now. And primarily impacting that, and John Viola had talked about this in his previous presentations, that there is deferred revenue on the balance sheet for swim operations based on renewal of coupons, which for other departments, they actually book the revenue as income as soon as they sell them, but for some reason aquatics has been deferring them until they were, those coupons were used. Then they would bring them down into the profit and loss statement. But we are going to bring the rest of that deferred revenue down to be consistent with what happens with other departments. We're going to bring the rest of that money down in the remaining 6 months. And so that aquatics variance you'll see in the forecast is estimated to be about $29,000 unfavorable. General maintenance department for 6 months was $56,000 unfavorable, and that was primarily caused by unbudgeted renovations done at the yacht club and beach club in earlier in this fiscal year, around May and June. And then new capital items were 11,000 over budget, and that was primarily affected by two items. The platform tennis court, which we talked about before, was about $6,000. That was the charges that were incurred to finish off that new platform tennis court. And we had a $7,000 unbudgeted item in the police department. That was new equipment. Some of it, I was told, included the night vision goggles and other stuff. But interestingly enough, all that equipment was paid for by a grant that we received for our police department of $30,000 that also was not in the budget. So we have really like a no impact thing here. Well, for the expenditures, no impact at least on our cash position, because we got the money from the grant from, I think it was Worcester County. Worcester County gave us a grant of $30,000 that we did not have in the budget, or did not expect, and from that we purchased this $7,000 of police equipment. So that explains why the new capital for the 6 months is $11,000 over budget, between the $7,000 of the police, the $6,000 for the platform tennis court, and of course there were some other things that were under budget, some of the stuff that was slightly under budget. Now part two, next slide please. Part two, this again is trying to highlight how we came about with a $118,000 favorable variance for the 6 month period ending October 31st. So on the previous slide, I showed you roughly that $232,000 of unfavorable variances. But on this page, I'll be showing you that these variances I'm showing you here total about, and they're positive variance, favorable variance, above budget, is roughly 378,000. So you can see, if you take the 378 positive versus a 232 negative, I more than explain how we got up to the 118,000. They're short. I'm not saying that all the unfavorables were 232. That's just what I highlighted. But here, the yacht club had for the 6 months had $120,000 of favorable variance. It had it had $317,000 more revenue than budgeted, and that was offset by $197,000 of more expenses than budgeted. That was $317,000 that I'm mentioning is revenue above budget, but it was offset by $197,000 of expenses over budget, which gives you the $120,000 of favorable variance for the 6-month period. The fire and police had a favorable variance of $90,000 for the 6-month period. Again, for the police department, we had about $58,000 of wages under budget. It was $58,000 under budget, and I'm assuming that's still related to that open position. And where I lost my place here. Oh, and the fire department operating costs for the 6-month period was $17,000 below the budget. So we had $17,058, which that give you about $75,000, and there were some other favorables that resulted in total $90,000. For beach parking ended the 6 months period at $49,000 above budget. That was because they had $37,000 more revenue than they had budgeted, and their expenses were $12,000 under budget for the 6-month period. So you get $12,000 less expenses, $37,000 more revenue, and that pretty much explains the $49,000 favorable 6-month variance for the beach parking. The finance department had a $32,000 favorable variance, and that was primarily the result of wages lower than budget of about $18,000, and services and supplies $7,000 lower than budgeted. That was about $25,000 I've explained there, and there was miscellaneous other overs and unders that resulted in the $32,000. I'm just pointing out in my talks here the major items. The wages $18,000 below budget, and services supplies $7,000 below budget. The marinas had $27,000 favorable variance for the 6-month period. That was $17,000 in revenue above the budget, and they had $11,000 less in wages than budgeted. Recs and parks had $19,000 favorable variance for the 6-month period. They had $28,000 in wages under budget, $28,000 under budget in wages. But they had also offsetting that slightly was $11,000 less revenue than budget. So they saved money on the wages by about $28,000, but they didn't bring in as much revenue to the tune of about $11,000. So 11 from the 28 gives you, gets you close to the 19, explaining how they got to that. Golf for the 6-month period is favorable by $19,000. Now they had $41,000 in wages that were less than budget for the 6-month period, 41,000. And they had revenues of, but that was offset because they had $22,000 less than budget in the revenue. Okay? So even though they were below budget in wages, they were also below $22,000 below in revenue. So you take the 22,000 revenue, the decrease in revenue from budget offsets that $41,000 decrease in wages, and you get to the 19,000 favorable for the 6-month period. The beach club, 17,000. That was almost, that was 13,000 under budget variance in their services and supplies for the 6-month period. And helping that was also a $2,000 favorable variance in revenue for the period. The 3 racket sports netted about $5,000 favorable variance. The big one there was pickleball, had $7,000 favorable result for the 6-month period versus their budget. So I finished the section sections explaining the month results for October and the 6 months results for the period ending October 31st. The next slide is the status of our cash. We have developed, as you know from John's prior presentations, so-called laddered investments in CDs. The overall investment rate of return for our investments for the month was 2.25%, which is a pretty good rate. At October 31st, the association had approximately $12.9 million in cash. And that has been invested in $9.7 million are invested in the CDARS, certificates of deposit, that are fully insured by the FDIC. And then there's approximately $3.2 million in operating accounts that are invested in money market instruments that are also insured. Some by FDIC and $1.5 million insured by an excess deposit insurance bond purchased by Union Bank, where we have some of our funds deposited. I would like to just keep making the, go to the next slide. This is the status of our reserves at the end of October. We have, we started out with a balance at the end of last year, or the beginning of this fiscal period, 4/30/18. That was the end of the last period, beginning of this period. We had a balance in the replacement reserve of $4.6 million. We have received year-to-date assessments and interest income of $1.7 million. We spent so far year-to-date about $300,000, and so now we have a balance in the reserve of $6 million in the replacement reserve. For the bulkheads, we have we started out with $2.5 million. We have assessments and interest that came into the account during the period of $700,000. We spent about $200,000 on bulkheads, and that leaves the reserve standing at $3 million at the end of the period. For roads, we started, as you can see, $800,000.
we have transferred in the casino funds of $300,000. So now the balance is at $1.1 million in the roads reserve. So total, we have $10.1 million in our reserves. But I just got to keep reminding people that about $3 million of that in the bulkhead, almost all that, the majority of that is reserved for replacement of bulkheads owned by property owners, not owned by Ocean Pines. So if you want to, for the most part, Ocean Pines, the $6 million replacement is for all Ocean Pines property. The roads are all Ocean Pines, but that $3 million is not all for Ocean Pines bulkheads. As a matter of fact, it's a very small portion of that $3 million is for Ocean Pines bulkheads, because we just don't have that much bulkhead when you compare it to the amount of bulkheads that are owned by the members of Ocean Pines. Next slide, please. This is the status. Another slide showing the reserves at October, the estimated remaining budgeted reserve spending for 2018. In the replacement reserve, there's approximately $1.3 million left to be spent. And I've itemized, I picked these items off of the approved budget for the replacement reserves. The bulkhead, we're going to spend approximately $1 million more according to the management. We spent, as I've showed on the previous slide, so far during the year in the bulkhead about $200,000. There was a approval by the board for a McGinty bulkhead contract, $621,000. That is expected to be done for the remainder of the year. So you got another $600,000 added to the $200 already spent. That gives you $800,000. And according to, I forget the engineer's name, Mr. Layfield? Mr. Layfield said that he is expecting to release in the next week or so an RFP for concrete bulkhead work to be done on Westfield Circle and Wood Duck Drive. And Mr. Layfield said he doesn't have the RFPs in because he's just going to release them for proposals, but he thinks that the project could cost anywhere to $200,000 to $300,000 for Westfield Circle and Wood Duck Drive. So we had $200 already spent, $600,000 or so approved by the board last month. So that's $800,000, and the new RFP to go out that Mr. Layfield estimates might be $200,000 to $300,000. That gets you to about, on a high side, $1.1 million to be spent for the year. Now, before I go to the next slide, I don't want to go there yet. The next slide that'll be coming up, is going to be a new report that we are issuing. It's going to be a forecast for the end of the year for the operating results for the end of the year at 4/30/2019. That's the end of our fiscal year. But I need to, and all of you know this, but it just has to just keep it in mind that that this is a forecast that we're making. It is not a new budget. We don't revise our budgets. It's a new just a forecast. It is not cast in stone. It will be changed. It will be reissued each month. Like I said, we will be revising it and reissuing it each month for the remainder of the fiscal year. And as we get better information, we will use that information in the next issuance. And I like to play with words. OPA is a nonprofit organization, as you all know. And I also like to say OPA is a nonprofit, P-R-O-P-H-E-T organization. We don't have profits. They can't predict the future. So we are nonprofit in that sense, but we're doing the folks on your staff of this association are giving their best estimates, given the information they have now, and you know no one can precisely or accurately predict the future for something as complex as an organization like OPA. For the next 6 months, there's too many things that can happen, that too many variables. But anyway, we are producing a forecast, so I'd like to go to, can you go to slide 18 first? It's the second one. Okay, if you look at the bottom line where it says subtotal, the revised estimate, the first column is on the left, is the revised estimate for the year at $12,303,000. The revised expenditures for, or revised expenses is $12,287. And so the forecast is saying we'll end the year at a very, a favorable, favorable result of $16,000 versus what the budget was approved at for $14,000. So based on this initial forecast, again, it's the initial one, the staff's first try. It was reviewed, but the reviewers are just human too. Again, there's no profits, P-R-O-P-H-E-T, in Ocean Pines. We come up with a $2,000 difference. And that's before you take in the capital additions. And again, the bottom line shows that the new capital will be in the revision $25,000 instead of the $15,000 budgeted, so that's $11,000 over budget. And we explained most of that before. So net on the forecast, we're forecasting a $9,000 negative operating results for the year. If you go back to the prior slide. Okay, thank you. We showed showed them by departments, and the pinks were some of the unfavorable variations to the estimate. And so, but we had also favorable variance to the estimate. So again, when you add them all up, it was a $2,000 difference from operations, but when you consider the purchase of new capital, which is $11,000, go to the next slide, which is $11,000, you have $11,000 unfavorable variance. You come away with ending the year at $9,000. Again, keep in mind the limitations that we all understand in trying to produce a forecast, and this is the first one. It'll be redone for the next few months to help the board and management manage your association. Thank you. I'm done, Steve.
Thank you, Gene. Is there any clarifying questions from any board members for Gene before we move on?
I'd just like to make one comment. In the year-to-date, we have not baked into those numbers any earned or potentially earned bonuses at the yacht club. So everybody by January will have a much better feel on that, and we'll make the adjustments through the rest of the year. But if there's been any earned, we have the monthly fee that we're paying on the management fee. That is included in all of the numbers. But as we calculate projected budget, we will start to set aside a bonus. We will start to set aside money in the monthly report through the end of the year, so we don't get a huge adjustment or a small adjustment at the end of the year. But just so when you look at those numbers, it doesn't include any adjustment to that.
Any other questions? Okay? Yeah, we'll let you have one.
John Viola's practice was to allow questions of
Yes, go ahead. Can you use the mic?
yacht club projection. By the way, my philosophy about a nonprofit is the Ocean Pines Association cannot make a profit until the assessment reaches at least zero.
Yeah. Well, whatever. I spelled profit right. I spelled it in 2 ways. Go ahead.
Joe, would you use the microphone?
Use the mic, please.
You want to share mine?
On the, is this Michael?
Is that on?
There you go.
Yes?
On aquatics, my understanding was that this cash issue that's been accumulated someplace is about $80,000. Is that roughly the correct number?
I don't know what you are
The
referring to.
aquatics cash that has been,
In the
you
balance
mentioned
sheet.
it in your
In
report.
the balance sheet, yeah.
Yes. Where was that money in the past? And are we adjusting whatever departments that money was in the past?
No, that was deferred. From my understanding, it was aquatic swim coupons. The money was booked as cash but put into deferred revenues because that department didn't count it as revenues until the coupons were being used. It wasn't in another department.
We have an account called deferred cash,
Revenues. Yeah.
deferred revenue? And it was accumulated as deferred revenue?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
but this went on for 5 years or so, I understand. That seems a little strange. Let's see here. How do we estimate the beach club is estimated at $100,000 loss, you're projecting, and I understand that it's a little difficult to do that. But if you look at past years, the beach club through the months when it was closed had expenses that ranged anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 or $12,000 per month. So we have, say, six.
I'm not
six-
sure where you're getting that number,
What?
the beach club.
Look at the monthly reports for the past decade.
All right, I don't have the monthly reports for the past decade.
Right. My point is, that's all right.
No, go,
There are some minor costs.
Right. Okay, that's okay. Never mind.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Any other questions for Gene? If not, we'll close this report, and we'll move to our general manager's report.
Good morning, everybody. We'll start off with fire pits today. Can one have a fire pit? Yes. Can one have an existing fire pit? Yes. Can one have a fire pit built on one's property? Yes. Can one have a portable fire pit? Yes. So what's all the fuss about? The governing documents, the declaration, paragraph 8S states the following, quote, "No outside burning of wood, leaves, trash, garbage, or household refuse shall be permitted. Therefore, fire pits can be approved, but not for the open burning of wood, etc. Open burning is defined as the ignition and subsequent burning of any combustible material, garbage, leaves, grass, twigs, litter, paper, vegetative matter involved with land clearing, or any other sort of debris, in the open or in a receptacle other than a furnace, incinerator, or other equipment connected to a stack or chimney." Now, that does leave some open areas, like charcoal and things like that. With all that said, the ARC, a committee of your fellow members, is looking to create language within the guidelines that, one, allows for existing fire pits and how they can be grandfathered, and what guidelines they should be governed by, and two, provides a process for new fire pits to be created, and three, what rules need to be considered for construction, placement, and use of a fire pit that actually is constructed on a lot. Under paragraph 5A of the declaration, permanent structures on lots are required to have a permit from the association. If the fire pit is portable, of course it does not. However, there are some guidelines that all fire pits need to follow, and the ARC is in the process of spelling those out. Some examples might be a fire pit needed to have a screen or an ember arrestor, guidance on what you should or shouldn't burn so that one does not create fly ash, which is what the potential problem is. In any capacity of use, a fire pit cannot create a public nuisance. The burning cannot impact one's neighbor negatively. Because of the DR language, there can become a liability exposure to the association. It's no longer an issue of that's a matter between neighbors. If you live in an association, that becomes something that the association actually has to deal with. However, the bottom line to all this is we can't legislate being neighborly. If you have a fire pit, use it properly and be aware of your neighbor's presence and possible concerns. The same is true as if you don't have a fire pit, but your neighbor does. We all have a right to the quiet enjoyment of our property. However, that obviously doesn't mean we each get to have it all with disregard to our neighbor's same right. If you have a fire pit, this is an example, if you have a fire pit and your neighbor's kid's already outside playing and the wind's blowing pretty hard that direction, maybe it's not the best time to start a fire. However, if you don't have a fire pit and your neighbor has started a fire pit for their grandchildren to make s'mores, that's okay to do that. And perhaps if that activity is going to bother you, maybe it's not the best time for you to be in your backyard if that's going to irritate you. But anyway, the bottom line is be aware of your surroundings, protect yourselves, your property, your neighbor's property, and protect the natural environment. By safely operating a fire pit, burning the right things to prevent fly ash, using a screen, and making sure the smoke isn't creating a problem for your neighbor, everybody can enjoy one's own property. Mowing of drainage ditches. So, if the association is responsible for mowing the road edge to the bottom of the roadside ditches in front of private property, the legal opinion is no. The statement issued on the matter said just that and nothing more. However, the practicality of how to handle the mowing of the ditches is something quite different. So let me try to begin to address that issue. While the legal opinion is that the association does not have to mow from the road edge to the bottom of the ditches, that, in my opinion, is not the approach we should take. It hasn't been that way either. So even though we legally aren't required to, practically speaking, I believe that the association could continue to mow the roadside ditches until we get different direction from that, from edge of pavement to the bottom of the ditch. Why? Well, let's get practical for a moment with a demonstration. I'll give you three options. The public works crew has the mower loaded onto a trailer. The crew drives the truck and the trailer with it to the entrance of a neighborhood. We unload the mower and mow the entrance area. Then we load the mower back onto the trailer, drive the truck and the trailer with the mower on it to the next area the association is legally responsible for maintaining, unload the mower and mow. Then we do that repeatedly. We load and unload, mow a short section of grass, and then we load it back on and we keep going. Or, option B, the crew drives the truck and trailer to the entrance of a neighborhood. We unload the mower and mow the entrance area. Then we ride the mower down the road to an area that the association is legally responsible to maintain and mow, not cutting any other property along the way. If we finish the area we're legally responsible for, then ride the mower down the road to the next section we're legally responsible for, and then cut the grass again. And we keep repeating that. Or the crew drives the truck trailer to the neighborhood entrance. We unload the mower and mow the entrance area. We continue mowing the roadside ditches throughout the entire neighborhood. Then we load the mower back on the trailer and go to the next area. Which one makes the most sense? Which one makes the best use of time, labor, machine hours, and gas? The answer is C. Unless there's some unknown logic that I'm not aware of, that is likely to be the way we handle landscape maintenance of the roadside ditches. In the meantime, we'll keep mowing them as we have been. The Country Club renovation plans, the pre-bid meeting was this past Monday. We had 5 contractors present. DBF, our architectural engineering firm, has been in contact with 13 contractors interested in the project. The RFP was issued November 16th. The deadline for bids is December 14th. The review of the proposals will take place later in the month, obviously, and then it'll be up to the board to consider the next steps with that project sometime in January. Regarding the insurance issue, that's also on the agenda for later on today, but I will make a statement here. An RFP was issued on November 2nd for insurance brokerage services. The deadline for receipt of proposals has been extended to December 12th to provide us with even more broker options for consideration. It has been sent to 19 different brokers. for reviewing and evaluating the responses and for direct interviews of the few selected proposers. The following individuals are going to work with myself and Steve Phillips, the Director of Finance, to review that. That's Sharon O'Hare, a real estate agent, past board member, and Larry Perrone, a representative of the Budget and Finance Committee, who also has a background in the insurance industry. I would like to add 2 more members to that review team. So if you're interested and have a background in insurance and one that obviously is not a conflict of interest, please contact the office. We'll evaluate the broker proposals during December and provide a recommendation for brokerage services to the board in January. Wildlife management, we have concluded our current operational contract with Maryland Geese Control. They were on site for 7 weeks, having begun back on October 9th. At $625 a week, that was $4,375 spent on that service. Leaves us about $5,500 left in that line item for wildlife management to pursue other mitigation efforts in the spring. That may include continued use of Maryland Geese Control, particularly in the springtime when we have their contract price includes the addling of eggs and removal of nests. So that's something I think that we want to do, and so we have that money there for that. Road striping has been of interest of the last several days. It's underway for the entire length of Ocean Parkway and Capitol Road. The contractor will continue to work until the project is complete and the work meets our expectations. I say that because I'm very much aware of the problems so far with the line painting. As a resident myself, I travel the roads and I see it during the daytime, and particularly you can see it worse at night, the areas of discrepancy. So we've been working with the company, talking to the president of that company, it's SCS, and they're working to correct the issue. Any cost to make changes to that is borne by the company. I can also share with you that the contract is paid in portions with 50% up front and 50% at the end, so we do have some leverage to ensure a good final product. Of course, we are all working on the budget. If you can't find me this next week, that's because I'm sequestering myself so I can concentrate on that.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions for JB from the board? Okay, we'll accept that report. We'll move now to public comments. I do ask if you want to make a comment, you use a microphone and identify yourself and where you live when you make your comments. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Steve Stein. Do I need to give my address? I'm at number 2 Grandport Road. I have 2 questions. One question is, I'm just curious as to how the investigation is going with the money that was missing. I haven't heard anything lately about it. And my other question is, at the yacht club, I don't know if this board can do anything about it, but I want to call it to your attention that I'm representing the boat club here in Ocean Pines. And we had a cabinet up there, which was a trophy case for our equipment and trophies that we had given out over the years. That was up there. It was taken down for remodeling. It has not been put back up, and we would like it put back up, but we don't know when or where that's going to happen, and I don't know if this board is aware of that. But I'm calling it to your attention, so we will try and get something done about that so it can be put back up. It's a fairly nice-looking piece of furniture, and it had our trophies in it. It was nice and something that would should be represented by a yacht club, because it was based on boating, and most yacht clubs do have trophy cases. So we would like that put back into the yacht club where it was, and we don't have any idea where it is now. I know maintenance has it because they took it down, so I don't know what the situation is on that. So that's all. Did you want to say anything?
Dolores Lloyd, 65 Wood Duck Drive. I'd like to point out to you that both the Boat Club and the Power Squadron have cabinets, but each cabinet was $1,200. They're nice cabinets made by the maintenance portion. Where the boat club cabinet was is now an empty wall. We all think that these cabinets should be in the yacht club. I also would like to know if Ott has a contract stating that they have the sole permission to put things up on the wall. Can I get an answer, or I have to wait for an answer?
I'll be very glad to talk to you after the
Okay,
meeting.
thank you very much.
Joe?
Thank you. Joe Reynolds, 84 Watertown Road. Just for some clarity, when you were talking about the fire pits, you're still maintaining that the only thing that can be burned is gas, is that correct?
I would say, I'll answer that after the meeting.
Okay. As the board knows, I contacted the board of directors and Ocean Pines attorney in regard to the mowing within the Ocean Pines right-of-way. The attorney wrote back to me and acknowledged that he received my email and would be making a decision of some kind. I haven't heard anything from him, but I'm curious whether the attorney has reaffirmed that the Ocean Pines Association is not liable and that individual members are liable to cut grass on property 100% owned by the Ocean Pines Association. Can somebody clear that? Mr. Bailey today said that the legal opinion was that we have to cut the grass in the OPA-owned right-of-way.
You want to speak to that, JB?
He has basically reaffirmed that that the legal opinion has not changed.
Can we get a copy of that opinion? This is an important issue.
I know. As stated in the original press release, the full opinion, as originally written, is being because we have an ongoing legal case on a drainage issue.
That could go forever.
Well,
I think association members, many people on this board campaigned on the issue of transparency. This is an issue that impacts every association member. And we're backpedaling on this. We're spending a lot of money with legal fees, and now we're being told that the association members cannot even see the legal opinions that we're paying for. Something doesn't make sense. This is not one individual case. This is an issue that impacts every single lot in Ocean Pines. And I would urge the board of directors to think about this and to do something about it and make this opinion public. I can't believe that the association members are responsible for cutting grass on property that is owned 100% by the association. These are not easements. This is a right-of-way. Next item I want to talk about is the outsourcing. During the period when we looked into the software that OPA might buy as opposed to outsourcing, there were many meetings. There were 2 public meetings with the association treasurer, went into great detail about the software, what it would do, what it wouldn't do, et cetera. Now we've put out bids for outsourcing, and it's a black hole. We have no information. We have a recommendation that came from the general manager that was done, for lack of a better word, in secret.
it was a review team. I will address that. It was a review team. It didn't just come from the general manager.
The team did not include the treasurer, Mr. Viola.
His choice?
Who was a great proponent. It may have been his choice. But past board members have contacted me about where's the information on the decision. I've seen no information on how that decision was made or to make that recommendation. I don't know if the board has seen all the details. Some of the people making the decision are employees who might be at risk of their jobs if the outsourcing were implemented. All I'm asking for is a fair and open and transparent process in this whole thing, and I don't think we're getting it. And people on this board today campaigned on that, and we're not getting an open, transparent process in looking at this. And today we have a discussion that Mr. Trendick is proposing to discuss the issue, followed by a motion by Director Horn to approve the general manager's recommendation. This is a decision that's going to impact this association for decades to come. And it is not an emergency decision. So I would urge you, whatever you do today, don't go making a decision until this is all played out and the public is properly informed. With regard to the wildlife, thank you for saying that you were going to, that the person who was chasing the geese away is going to addle the eggs and do something with the nest. So I think that's important. I think the lack of geese that we saw after the 300 or so were killed indicates that is why we have fewer geese. The geese that are out there now, I think we're wasting money with the guy chasing them around in a kayak because they're migratory birds. And they come and they go, and they don't really act the same as the normal birds that live around here. So anyway, thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Hi, folks. My name is Doug Tribal. I live on 25 Harpoon Road in Ocean Pines. And I want to follow up on the software issue that we're talking about. So in the spirit of transparency, I'm going to talk about real briefly something that I really like to talk about. That's myself. So I'm going to do that real quickly. I spent 40 years in the IT services industry. I worked for IBM, AT&T, Siemens, Gartner, who's the world's largest consulting company in IT, and Northrop Grumman. So I know what I'm talking about. So I've just lived here 2.5 years, and here's the transparency part. When I got down here, I decided I couldn't retire. So I went and got a job with a company called the Tesla Group, which is an IT services and consulting organization. So as a business development guy, I'm looking at the paper, and I see that Ocean Pines, my adopted community, is having IT issues. So I think, well, for a purely selfish reason, I'm going to go to the board and offer Tesla support. So I wrote letters, and I made phone calls, and no one ever called me back. Never got a return call, never got an email, nothing. So as a local business guy, that really disappointed me a bit. So then I read that we're going to think about installing an application software in our network here. I got to tell you, it's an awful idea right now. I'm going to ask the board, have you ever done an assessment of your IT services right now? Do you know what you've got in terms of servers, printers, firewalls, network devices, routers, security, data storage, data recovery? Have you done a benchmark on where you are today? Do you know? I guess not. Okay, that's bad. The second thing that every major company does, and division, and organization, is they find out where they are right now and document it. They figure out where they want to be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years out. Then they build something called a migration plan. How am I going to get from point A to point B? Point B, when you get there, you've got a solid, hopefully you have a solid, supportable, scalable, fast enough, robust enough, risk mitigated system. That's when you put an application program on top of that. If you go and spend a lot of money and put an application package that run the whole community on top of your network infrastructure you have right now, it's going to fail. And you're going to have a catastrophic failure. And now here's the question. When that happens, I'm going to quote my favorite movie, Ghostbusters. You're going to have old technology and new applications on it, and it's going to fail. Who are you going to call? You're going to call the IT people. You're going to call the applications people. You're not going to know where to go. And once again, we're going to spend a lot of money on something that's not going to work. So I urge you, find out where we are now. Build a migration plan. Get there. then put your application package on top of a stable network, okay? And as far as the geese are concerned, I hope we never kill them again. I hope we never go out and kill animals again. There's got to be a better way.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll close that portion. There are no capital purchase requests. There are no CPI violations to deal with, so we're going to move to unfinished business. The first is a discussion that Slobodan will start us off with.
Thanks, Steve. This is a perfect lead into, based on the comments made by the two association members. The topic is review of options to modernize association's IT management of key functions. A concise statement. The board must discuss and decide which business model is the most beneficial long-term solution to the associations to manage its key financial functions. Background. The association has been managing its core business and operational functions using outdated custom-developed software. Rising costs and concerns over the old system's reliability is becoming increasingly a problem, with many functions becoming more labor-intensive and taking too long to accomplish. After conducting the RFP process, we now have competitive offers for both the software solution with in-house management approach and a third-party outsourcing option. The first option would be to keep all responsibilities with the association staff, thereby handling all IT function services internally. The outsourcing option places the responsibilities on an experienced third-party solution provider. The board now must decide which option is best for the entire organization and provide the necessary resources to assure successful project implementation.
Responses, comments?
I will take a mic if there are no comments, and leading to the next part of my discussion topic, try to frame the conversation. I'm a visual guy, so I think it would really help if I put together, kind of go back to my old days that some of us will relate to, and put together a quick, what I would call a flow chart that describes the journey that we are about to embark on, or actually started to embark on, related to what a couple of members have said earlier. So we're basically looking at, I hope this works. And just remember, English is not my mother tongue, so if I misspell anything, please don't punish me. But we're talking about the IT modernization journey. Typically, it is process-driven. And it usually starts with what the gentleman said earlier and what Joe said earlier. It is the discovery and the assessment step in the process. The next phase, or the next step in the process, is really a modernization roadmap or a plan. We have done some of this already. The technology work group that was put together by Doug Parks and the rest of the board did an excellent job in really taking an inventory on a lot of the things that we already have. That needs to be vetted and analyzed to make sure that everybody knows what's in place. That leads us to the next process, which is really something that we need to do now, and that is to develop a modernization road plan or a roadmap. That leads us to the next step, making a process which is really very critical, and this is the heart of the whole modernization journey. On the top, you have enterprise architecture management. On the bottom, you have knowledge and skill transfer. And in here, you have 4 key pieces. You have the platform, which is things that the gentleman discussed: hardware, operating system, database, network. Then you have the apps world, the applications, and then, very important, you have the business process, and you have the integration. That leads us to the next step. And that is, ideally, where you're going to be is to align your business and technology, which gives you the final result, the end game, and that is your business process or the operational excellence. That's the B, the end of the entire transformation. Companies are doing this. They call it digital transformation map. They call it many different fancy terminologies. But I think it's important for us to know what we are really embarking on. It is not a simple RFP for a software or a simple RFP for outsourcing support services. It is truly a very complex corporate roadmap that takes us from very old, antiquated IT platform that we have with a lot of custom code, a lot of developed software, very little resources, very costly, to where we ideally want to be. And that's what every corporate entity today is striving for, leveraging the technology and taking best business practices and looking for a most cost-effective, long-term solution that is not a 2-year solution, but it's really looking at 10 years out and beyond, and doing it in a way that it's very flexible so that you have a very robust back office support and the front office, and therefore you have totally integrated environment. So this is where we are, and what I wanted to do, along the lines of what Joe Reynolds said and this gentleman here, is we as a board want to be transparent. We want to share with the membership this whole program that we're looking at, where we are, and also to start thinking and talking as a board publicly and decide, how do we accomplish this? Because the general manager has asked us in the next 45 days really to come up with a decision. What is the business model that we want to adopt? Is it the outsourcing approach? Is it a single in-house solution? Is it maybe the combination of two, a hybrid approach? And we as a board now are challenged with looking at the environment and then coming up with the answer and telling the GM what the board would like to adopt as a business model, as a policy, so that he can move on with the next step in our modernization roadmap. So this is what I wanted to do and the purpose of the discussion. And I welcome the input from my colleagues, and I need a water. And I think this is especially important to a lot of my colleagues that don't have the IT background that, for example, Doug and I mean, I don't want to say how many years we've been in the business, but we have scars from the projects that we have survived, and we know how difficult this is. Collectively, between him and I, we got over 60 years of experience. And there's a lot of people in the audience here. I mean, you mentioned some of the small players that you worked for in Northrop and Siemens. These are some IBM. So there's a lot of wealth and a lot of information and knowledge that exists in the community. And I think we can really do a great job by coming up with what is very important, and that is the modernization roadmap, the modernization plan, and then that's going to help us really execute and take the journey from the beginning to the end, hopefully with the very little failures or no failures at all, because IT projects are challenging. You're always going to have those challenges, but if we plan well, then we will be prepared for those. So I'm kind of opening the floor to see what my colleagues think about this, and what do we do next? You have to ask the chair of the meeting.
Yeah, we've done with public comments, but if you have a quick question, I'll let you ask it. Go ahead. I'm going to waive Roberts for a moment.
His discussion that he's asking for help, from what I'm taking from what he's saying. There are a few people on the board that are qualified to make suggestions or give help. Most of you are not. There are people, especially the guy right here, I know what his name is, but I suggest the board seek help in making
Okay, thanks. We definitely take that under consideration. Okay, board discussion. Frank?
All right. We've kind of done the very first thing here that needs to get updated because we bought all kinds of computers and software and all, I mean, not software, but, you know, servers and all kinds of stuff. So we need to do that. And business process is a little bit different thing. We're talking organization strategically, that kind of part like that. But in terms of getting to closure so that we can make a decision, first question would be, do you think we can do that in 45 days? We have a lot of pieces that we know, and it's a matter of bringing that together to focus. And we also, and I know we're not stuck with a 45-day thing, but we're now on year 2+ in looking at this, and at some point we need to get to a closure and walk through this, and be able to move forward with some kind of a recommendation. Do you feel that within 45 days with a small group under the GM, we can get it, then come back to everybody and say, hey, here's how we walked through this process, answered these questions, and lay it out so that we can get to that decision-making process at that point?
I believe we can. I think if we have the right people identified to join the GM, and to work on this and really apply the necessary time to do it. I believe that we should be able to come back to the GM and to the board with what I would suggest would be a report, which is basically a modernization roadmap that will identify the proper business model or the preferred business model and support that with a clear information, back it with a clear data. So I think it is possible, and if we do run into an issue, we will know why, because we will actually know what the reasons are. What is as the Director Horn said, you know, we need data, and if we don't have data, then we will know what's missing, and we will be able to go after the data and collect it in order to be able to make the decision. So yeah, I do believe it's feasible. You do have an issue with the holiday season we are up against. Yep. So, but I think if we make a best effort and identify the right people that have the experience, when we work on IT projects, we call it the midnight oil burning time, 24/7. So it can be very intensive, but I think it is possible.
Colette?
My understanding is that this journey started 2 years ago. And at that time, 2 of the current directors were directors. I know that Director Parks was intimately involved in the founding of the TWG and giving them their charge. And I'd like to hear from him about how much of this discussion actually happened in the process of deciding what direction the TWG was going to be asked to take, what their charge was, and what their composition was going to be. None of the rest of us were part of that history, and I don't want us to go back and repeat actions that were done previously. And I'm also going to I'm not usually one to focus on hindsight, but in September, when the motion was voted upon to look at RFP, getting information about the outsourcing option. At that time, I had suggested to the board that that was not going to give this board the answers they needed to make a decision today. And I had relied upon those of you at the table who are experts in business and in technology to please rethink and do something at that point that would prepare us for making this decision today. And here we are. And I'm very unhappy about that. So, Doug, are you still on the line? Could we hear from you about this history?
Doug? Sorry, I was on mute. And first of all, I apologize. It's probably the background noise because I'm on the Bay Bridge right now. But the other thing, too, is it's hard to hear some of the comments just based on the acoustics and so on and so forth. But I want to touch on a couple of things. I kind of heard what Colette was saying. I kind of heard, most of what everybody else was saying. But we touch on a couple of things. One is that we're talking about sort of this philosophical discussion. In any IT transformation, there are many factors. Three of them that have to be taken into consideration are business process, organizational culture, and budget. Those kinds of things are going to drive the transformation, okay? Sprinkled in ancillary to that is the current and future levels of risk that are associated with any of the business decisions that you have to do in alignment with taking the technology, aligning it with the business function. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of techno-babble, but let me explain. Someone mentioned that, whether it was in a public comment, that we got to know where we are. We knew where we were back in October of 2016. The management and staff at that time had recognized, along with several of the board members, myself included, when I was notified, we have an antiquated system that is difficult to support, that requires a lot of manual intervention, which, as we all know, is rife with potential error, fraud, and any other nefarious activities that would compromise the accuracy of the information. And hence the TWD was formed. They took the input. I don't have to tell you all that history. And they did a very, very, very good, very thorough assessment and came up with a recommendation based on the input from the staff. Not the input from them, not the input from the board, but the input from the people that are using the system, that are operationally responsible for running both finance, amenities, and all the other aspects of the OPA environment. Now we looked at, as a due diligence, and quite frankly, I had to be convinced, and after I talked with colleagues, it was the right thing to do to go out and say, compare that against the outsourcing. Now we're looking at a business model, just so we can make sure that we've done the due diligence to compare all the possible options. That's been done. So in my mind, I think we've like John Viola, I'll take a quote from John Viola, he checked the box. Or in other words, I checked all the boxes off that we did so that we did a valid comparison. And I think we're at a point now where we can't delay this any longer. Let me go back to my risk comment. There was someone else said there's no sense of urgency right now. I would disagree. Every day we run on this antiquated system that's supported by a single vendor who has highly customized that system, whose technical knowledge is the only source of any type of resolution should some calamity occur, puts us at a very high risk position. Okay, so where's our disaster recovery plan? If that place crashed tomorrow, what would we do? Part of what we're doing right now, and the sense of urgency, has to do with how do we make sure we are not only operationally efficient in the future, but we reduce and, quite frankly, eliminate the current level of risk that we have. If we sit on this decision any further, and the term, I'm sure many people are aware, paralysis by analysis, we've done the due diligence, okay? Yes, I think, quite frankly, all of the discussions have been very healthy, they've been very productive, they've been thought-provoking, but at some point, a decision needs to be made. And quite frankly, I think we have enough information right now to move forward with the decision, because quite frankly, the thing that concerns me the most right now is that level of risk and the unknown of how we would recover from some situation that would prevent us from being operationally effective for OPA.
Frank, go ahead.
Let me comment. I have had questions regarding our approach since prior to my election to the board. Some of those questions remain unanswered. I clearly recognize the need for new software, and I clearly understand the need for urgency and when we have a time frame to do it within a certain time period to get it implemented. But I don't think we can just charge forward with major unanswered questions that have been unanswered, in my mind, for 3 or 4 months. Now, as recent as yesterday, the general manager sent me a document that I hadn't had before that answers some of those questions. It was 27 pages long, okay? I need time to digest and review that. But there are still some basic things that remain unanswered. Number one, what does not the recommendation cover? Okay? When are we going to get those items covered? How much are they going to cost? When are they going to be implemented? How are we going to run this system? Which goes to the first thing. And I am not an IT guy, but I've put these systems in big divisions from an operating standpoint, and if you don't answer those questions, you can end up with a nightmare from the operating side. So can we do it in 45 days? Yeah. But I think it requires us to sit down and have some working sessions where we go through this thing stem to stern, where the questions are answered. It's not, yeah, we have a solution. Okay, I know there's a damn solution out there. We run in an electronic world. I want to know what our solution is for a specific problem. And it's not like the questions are nebulous. I want to know how we're going to cover public works. This board has been told the following. We don't have a road plan. We don't have a budget for roads. Okay? We know we've had deteriorating infrastructure with bridges. Okay? How is the software going to cover that? If we don't answer those questions and move ahead, what are we going to have? Somebody that operates at the speed of a light in one section of the organization and somebody manually entering things from the back of old IBM cards in another? I think they're valid questions that need to be answered. I think they can be, but I think it requires us to roll up our sleeves and do something that, quite frankly, the board has said it doesn't want to do, and that is get into more of the operating details and ask some detailed questions on how we're going to move from point A to B to C, so that when we get to point D, we have exactly what we want to manage this association effectively.
And I think, let's just go back and look at history for 1 minute. Only 2 of the 7 people sitting up here were here when the TWG started, and the GM wasn't here when the TWG started. So I'm going to go with what you're saying here, Frank, in the sense that it's time to stop screwing around with all kinds of different stuff. It's come to us. We've got questions. Let's sit down. Let's knock the damn thing out and get it done, because otherwise, in 6 months, there's going to be, or 8 months, there's going to be another board, and you're going to go back through this again. So let's sit down look at the things here to make sure we've got everything dotted, because a lot of it just needs to get pulled together and updated and freshened, correct, Slobodan? And then we have a lot of questions on software providers, in, out, whatever. But all of that stuff can get knocked out by sitting down and going with the manufacturers, whoever the providers are, and finding out what we have. My main concern is whether there are some holes in there that need to be filled with other software that has to API in, or whatever the hell the right vernacular is there for that kind of stuff. But we've got to commit as a board to put the work in here, whether it's those people who have a ton of questions or have the IT backgrounds, and get this thing knocked out. Because whether it's 45 days, 30 days, 60 days, we've got to make a decision, answer our questions, and then go forward. Because, if we don't, we are just, as Doug says, expending risk, but more importantly, we're not doing our job. So I think let's stop throwing it out, and let's take it back in as a board thing and drive it forward, working with the GM through that. That's kind of my opinion.
The motion that was put forth in September that you all voted for was to answer the question of in-house or outsource. The data that we received and the analysis that was done by the review group, I believe, has given us the answer to at least that question. I think the answer that we've gotten is that based on the costs and the limited adequate response we got to the RFP, that we can pass a motion today at least that looks at the in-house versus outsourcing decision. And I would like us to at least accomplish that today. I think if we go into this discussion process that Ted and Slobodan talk about, we're going to find ourselves running around in circles continuing to ask that question. I think we need to come to a decision today about the business model that we're going to be exploring in this final process.
Slobodan and then Frank.
You know, Colette, I think we all feel, in a way, the way you do, that everybody wants to make a decision. We want to get to that point. But there are some very major questions that I have a list of, which are related to the outsourcing approach. I also have a list of questions that are related to the in-house approach. And unless we have the answers to those questions, because we all did sit down and review the proposal that was outsourcing proposal, and we all have notes on those, but we haven't really discussed it as a board, and we haven't shared our observations with each other to first of all, highlight the risks, and then figure out if they are manageable. How do we get around it? Whether it's price, whether it's resource issue, whether it's time commitment, integration issues, all sorts of things. The same kind of questions exist with the sort of like all-in-one single software solution. Doug pointed out earlier that right now we have, a very high level of risk because we're dealing with one single vendor with a customized software. Well, if we go with an in-house single vendor solution, we get, possibly we're inheriting similar level of risk that needs to be sorted out and managed. And I see some people in the audience kind of shaking heads because they can relate to what I'm saying. And for this reason, to say that we need to decide today, I believe it's a self-inflicted deadline that really doesn't have to be put upon us today. I believe that taking another 30 days or 45 days, having the GM put a small group together with the support from a couple of board members that have the knowledge and skill in this area and other people is really going to allow us to do the due diligence and really come up with comfortable answer on whether it's a business model A, B, or maybe the combination of the two. We have not had that kind of a conversation. We've been basically relying on, number one, the work that was done by the technology work group, and they did a phenomenal job. And also, number two, we are relying on the review team that was put together by the GM, that basically nobody in that review team had any IT background, from what I can tell. Number two, nobody in that review team had an in-house operational background that I know the treasurer recommended, and I was also very much in favor of that. So I can be very sympathetic to what you're saying about let's try to make a decision today. But if we were to vote on something like this, I would not be in a position to vote, not because I don't want to, but I just don't have the answers that I need in order to make a business decision that's in the best interest of the association, that's going to basically commit us to a business model that should be with us for 10 years plus. You can't change that overnight. It's very costly. You're talking $1 million plus project, and that's just starting it. And then over a period of X number of years, this is a huge investment, and I believe it would serve us well. And it would be wise of this board to put together this small group, spend another 30 days, 45 days, and sit down with people like Frank, Doug, myself, others, and let's get this done, and let's come to the board with a formal recommendation, and then the board can vote on it.
Frank? I echo Slobodan's comments.
Oh, sorry. Okay, we'll let you go first. Go ahead, Doug.
So a couple of things. While I am, we'll call it in passive agreement with what Slobodan just said, and the reason I say passive is that we've done this already. We've gone through this, and what I see, if the pessimist in me sees, here we go again. We're getting another group together, so we get another opinion. And then what's to say that once that effort's done, we get another group together for another opinion, and ad nauseum, ad infinitum, we continue to do this, and we just delay the whole process. Okay, now I'm not saying that's going to happen. I just, you know, if I'm an eternal pessimist, then I'm thinking that the optimist in me says, wait a minute, you know, if people will get to a comfort level, because I would agree it's a very important decision, but if an additional round of assessment would happen based on, you know, another group looking at it, another qualified group looking at it, you know, and that would include not just, I'll disagree with your comments, Mr. Lebanon, it's not just going to be an IT perspective. You have to have some folks who are operationally relevant in order to do that, all right? So any project that starts out IT-centric only will fail. You know that, and there's probably others in the room that know that. So having someone on that committee, that review team, whatever you want to call it, will need to have someone for the operations environment that's not associated with IT. I will begrudgingly, and I will say this in public, begrudgingly agree to that, but if it happens, if it's more than 2 weeks, then it's a non-issue, all right? We cannot delay this any longer. Again, I deal a lot, as a CIO, I deal a lot not only in business process, but the risk analysis. What risk to the business of the technology, of any failure, any component of the technology landscape will prevent us from either collecting revenue or providing services? Okay, and until we address that as Ocean Pines, I, for one, won't be comfortable. We've done the due diligence, all right? It's time to move forward. One of the things that we talked about earlier, and I hope I'm not premature in saying this, but you know, the idea of maybe is some options to the motion that's going to come up on the floor in new business. You know, maybe there's some discussion, some opportunities there to frame something that would carry us through. So I'll leave it to that. But I just want to make sure that, again, my knee-jerk reaction is what again, another set of analyses. What would we hope to accomplish that we haven't accomplished already?
Frank?
As I said, you know, I echo Slobodin's comments. I also understand, Doug, where you're coming from. Here's where I believe we should be at. I think if there's ever a need for this board to get together in working sessions with a group, this is the issue to do it on. And if we can't all make it, tough. The ones that can make it should be here and do it. And we should schedule it and get it done. And I respect everybody's comments, but how can we rule out one solution when we have a lot of open questions on the second one? I mean, this is what I know as a board member, okay? I have a 4-page analysis, and the analysis basically says this. The outsourcing solution costs more and will increase the assessment. How much more and how much is it going to increase the assessment? That same analysis says that there's basically no cost savings in going with the North Star option, and there's no appreciable increase in the time that we're going to get our financials. The outsourcing option says they have 530 standard reports. I want to know how we're covering public works. I look at a brochure, they cover utility districts. Are some of the public works reports buried in that 530 reports? Beats me. I haven't seen the damn reports. I don't know what they're titled. Okay? So I think all of that has to be there along with some detailed analysis. Ted provided us with a detailed analysis. I have 4 lines where we're going to reject the outsourcing option. You know, that's a little skimpy for $1 million expenditure that takes 20% of our reserves, that's going to lock us into decades, when I also know from the very same meeting that I got that data that our treasurer, who's not here, raised some very specific questions on control issues on business processes. It is just simply too early to rule out one in favor of the other. But I think it's time that we get together around a table with JB's team, with the people that represent the 2 solutions, and bring our questions and ask them all and get them vetted, and don't have any surprises. This is not a secret thing where we have to wait at the last minute and pop up with a surprise question. We have them, list them, do them, get them answered, and move forward.
All right, and I agree completely, and now we got a sense of urgency here. And so what I would say is that where we need to go, trying to put this into one thing. The board, working with the GM, commits to completing all due diligence of solutions to include filling all software holes, pricing, and ancillary areas within 45 days and bring a recommendation to the full board. And I'm in agreement with you. Let's get cracking. If everybody can't make it, and some people aren't interested in some of the details, some have read it, some are 3/4 of the way in, some are committed. But the bottom line is, we, if either we're going to accept what has been recommended by management, or if we have a lot of questions, we can't do exactly what you said, Frank, and that's to come in at the last minute and ask it. Let's get them done now. If we want to bring in providers, whether it's the outsourced one or the insourced one, pepper them with the questions. Let's get prepared. Let's get answers. Let's feel that we're confident in where we're going, and let's get to the end of the road here. Whether it's 30, 40 days, whatever it is, get through the holidays. The GM needs a solution from us either direction, whatever way we want to go, within 45 days. That's the time limit he's kind of said, hey, in order to get this thing moving, we need to go. I think we're committed as a board to moving forward that direction. Let's push it and do it.
Colette?
I absolutely do not want us to find ourselves in 45 days saying that we have more questions that need to be answered. This needs to come to a close. We need to reduce this risk by getting a decision done. And I'll reiterate how disappointed I am in what has happened since September, when this motion was carried forward, that now, here we are, having been told we would have what we need to make an answer, but we don't.
Okay, I'm thinking that we probably don't need to have a whole lot more discussion on this. I think the board is pretty much in agreement. It sounds like that we want to take the 45 days. So I don't know how we handle that with Robert's Rules of Order and all that, if we need a new motion or if we can take the motion that Colette's already put out.
I would entertain a friendly amendment that essentially rewrites my motion.
Wait till we get to the motion.
Yeah.
Okay. But, so are we okay with ending this conversation? Go ahead, Doug.
You're talking over one another. This is important. What is being proposed?
Doug, I am proposing that we end conversation on this discussion item and we move to the motion from Colette, which probably will get modified. Did you get that?
Very good. Yeah, it's only a discussion item, so yes, you can move to end the discussion as chair.
Okay, I so move. Where's my hammer?
You don't need to move.
Okay, fine. All right. I think our next item is the motion for the insurance review. Doug, do you want to read that? You want me to read it for you?
Yeah, because I'm in the car. It's going to be illegal for me to try to read anything.
Okay, I thought you had it memorized. Okay, so the motion is to rescind the motion passed at the March 29, 2018 board meeting regarding an audit of the association's commercial insurance policies and to accept the recommendations from the general manager to pursue such a review as part of the scope of work provided by broker. Purpose and effect. The motion will allow the GM to make a recommendation on the insurance broker that will best serve the needs of the association, including the knowledge and capacity to perform a review of the existing insurance policies and to make any changes and/or updates to existing policies and shop said policies to ensure best coverage and with best pricing. Background, a review of existing insurance policies is periodically required. The original motion on March 29 required the GM to accomplish an independent audit of the insurance policies. However, while doing research on the topic, the GM found that such a review of existing policies could be done via brokerage services and thus accomplish a review without additional expense. The original motion required a spend of unbudgeted funds from last year's budget when we were running a deficit, and again now in a year when such an expenditure is not budgeted. A view of our existing policies is included in the scope of work for the selected brokers. Discussion. Oh, we need a second on the motion, sorry. Do we get a second? Second. Okay, good. Now we can talk about it. Discussion. Go ahead, Slobodan.
Thanks. This motion basically references the motion that I put in front of the board in March, and it was passed unanimously. And the intent of the motion was really to get an independent opinion on how good is our coverage of what I consider critical physical assets, the yacht club, the bulkheads, the pools, etc. The motion didn't call for doing a comprehensive independent review of our insurance policies like, employee benefits, life insurance, disability insurance, et cetera, which obviously is very cumbersome, very comprehensive, timely, and very costly. But if you think about how important this is, the idea of the motion in March was really to get an independent third-party consultant to look at our commercial policies and do it in a way that where he or she is not trying to upsell us anything or to provide undercoverage or overcoverage, but really to give us a very unbiased, objective assessment to make sure that we are okay, and if we need additional coverage, that we buy it. If we don't, that we take a self-insurance approach and assume the known risks. So, I'm okay with the idea that Doug is presenting here, but I still want to just go on record that I believe that independent review is extremely important for the association to do this. And I'll just leave you with one thought that I have, just for the sake of comparison. If you're dealing with the investment broker and he is telling you what stocks to buy, how to allocate your assets, and you're going through a turbulence, market conditions, and you're trying to figure out, are you overexposed? Are you holding risky assets? Are you going to call the same broker that sold you this asset, or are you going to call and ask for an independent financial advisor to do assessment of your portfolio, because he's not trying to sell you any stocks. He's just trying to tell you whether you're overexposed or underexposed. So I think it's a good business practice. And I would encourage the board to look at this motion and still maintain a requirement for doing at some point an independent audit by an independent consultant. Thanks.
Ted?
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and offer a friendly amendment, if that's okay. And I would add it right on to the actual motion, and it would say this: the GM will engage an independent consultant to review key policies which will be identified by the board in conjunction with the renewal of our policies. And that then addresses that we're going to go ahead and get the broker. There will be some key policies or key holes that we may have that we want to at least explore to see what the options are out there, but allows the process to move forward. And if there are 2, 6, 8, but we don't need them to chase every detail here, but keep them focused on the issues and the areas we're worried about. And if that's acceptable to Doug and to Slobodan, I think that's a good solution that gets us to win-win here on this.
Did you hear that, Doug? You there?
Doug, you there? Yes, I'm sorry. The friendly amendment was basically saying that we go ahead and to have the GM shop the policy through the broker services, but add in a requirement to do the independent audit after that information is delivered to us. Is that correct?
Yeah, but we would limit that to only some key policies where we think there are holes or it's been identified. Okay. And the board will identify to him.
Assets, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's acceptable.
Okay. Frank?
And I'll address this question more to JB. If we proceed with this friendly amendment, then would that give us the time and capacity to incorporate this outside consultant in next year's budget and have it as a budgeted item?
Yes, if you think that
Yeah.
still maintain that that's, in the scope of work, by the way, evaluate OPA's existing insurance program and is necessary to make recommendations for the program as a board and adequate. Particularly, the board wants our umbrella policy
And the purpose under this is to do exactly that, but I can tell you, having worked for a major insurance guy as a consultant for a year, oftentimes we would go into where somebody else had the coverage with a very good broker and find wording or amendments or things like that. So we're limiting it not to going into everything, but for instance, are we carrying the correct amount of umbrella? Should we be trying to insure pools for the one-offs, or is the cost not worth the thing to do it? And so this isn't a full examination. This would be pointing out 3 to 5, maybe 6 areas that say, hey, look at this, is this best practices? The broker is responsible, as you said and as you know, for dotting the I's and crossing the T's. This is just to say, hey, from the outside, look, you don't really need this, or, oh, by the way, you're missing this in these key areas here, and that would be it.
My turn?
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Thinking through the friendly amendment, I see the benefit would be to serve as kind of an affirmation that any policy changes or coverage limit changes that the broker offered are now substantiated by an independent auditor, and that's, we're getting that proverbial second opinion on that, and I think that would put everybody's mind at ease. I know, speaking personally, it would, because we got one broker saying, hey, we've looked at your environment, we recommend making the following changes, and then right behind that, we've got an independent auditor that comes in and A, validates that those changes are good, and B, perhaps even looks at other areas that might have been overlooked, so we sort of cover our bases. So the more I thought about the friendly amendment, the more sense it makes to me.
All right, can we go ahead and vote
So
on
I'll
the friendly
second,
amendment?
I'll second Ted's amendment to the
So we have
original motion.
An amendment and a second. All in favor of the amendment? Aye. Okay, so now we, Doug.
Aye.
Thanks, Doug. Now we're going to vote on the original motion.
Sorry, I go on mute, guys, so you don't hear any background noise. My apologies.
The original motion, I can read it for you. And then
let me pick up right where you
right, okay, so the original motion is to rescind the motion passed on March 29, 2018 board meeting regarding an audit of the association's commercial insurance policies, and to accept the recommendation from the general manager to pursue such a review as part of the scope of work provided by the broker services.
The GM will engage an independent consultant to review key policies which will be identified by the board in conjunction with renewal of our policies.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on the amended motion? All right, call the question. All in favor? Aye? Aye. Aye. Great.
Aye.
Thanks. All right. We are on to the motion to recommend accounting functions. Colette.
Okay, the motion is to provide OPA a cost-effective solution, to accept the recommendation to implement the North Star software proposal as soon as possible, made by the review team for the RFP for outsourcing OPA finance accounting and accounting functions. The purpose and effect is to provide OPA a cost-effective solution to its need for software that will increase efficiency in the management and execution of finance and accounting functions. The background is the technology work group conducted a comprehensive and thorough review of software options for the management of OPA finance and accounting and other business functions. In April 2018, the TWG made a recommendation to the board for the purchase of a software product that meets the requirements of being both the most cost-effective and being the best at meeting the organization's needs. The recommended option was the proposal submitted by North Star. On September 8, 2018, the board passed a motion to instruct the GM to issue a non-binding RFP to secure proposals for back-office financial management to include necessary software, staffing, and IT support. The purpose of that motion was to secure cost comparison between outsourcing the financial functions and maintaining them in-house using the North Star software option or using the current environment or steady state. The cost comparison was done by a team consisting of the OPA Assistant Treasurer, a Budget and Finance Advisory Committee member, OPA General Manager, and OPA Director of Finance. The proposals were compared to two alternatives that keep the finance and accounting functions within the direct operation of the association. That is, the implementation of the North Star proposal and maintaining the existing environment or steady state. Of the 6 proposals received from the RFP, 5 were eliminated for lacking the capability to meet OPA's needs, for failing to offer an improvement on the current environment, or for failing to respond to the RFP requirements. The only viable respondent provided a proposal that offered a cost significantly higher than the steady state and was therefore considered extremely cost prohibitive. The North Star option is projected to offer a modest reduction from the projected ongoing yearly cost of the steady state. Based on this analysis, the review team recommended that the board pursue contracting with North Star for the proposal recommended by the TWG in April 2018.
Is there a second to the motion? Frank?
A second.
Okay, so we can now discuss the motion as presented.
Guys, I'm sorry, was the motion seconded?
Yes, it was, Doug.
Thank you.
We're moving into discussion of the motion.
I'd like to offer another friendly amendment to replace it with, the board working with the GM commits to completing all due diligence of solutions to including filling all software holes, pricing, and ancillary areas within 45 days and bring a recommendation to the full board.
Is there a second? Okay, so did you hear that, Doug? It's moved and seconded for an amendment.
Can you, I'm sorry, guys, I apologize. You had the acoustics. Can you say it one more time so I make sure I've got everything on the friendly amendment?
The board, working with the GM, commits to completing all due diligence of solutions to include filling all software holes, pricing, and ancillary areas within 45 days and bring a recommendation to the full board.
Okay, discussion of the friendly amendment.
So just a point of clarification. So your friendly amendment is really a language that replaces the original motion in its entirety, right? Okay, thanks.
So, just to clarify, what I would expect from this is Director Trendick's IT journey chart given to a group, and this board to commit to working sessions to fill that chart completely out to the absolute best of our ability for both the in-house North Star recommendation and the outsourced L&N recommendation. And I would even put the date on it by January 21st, but that's selfish because that's when I'm heading out to New Zealand.
We'll have the meeting in New Zealand.
Yeah, right. Other discussion on the friendly amendment? No other discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the friendly amendment to the motion?
I have to accept the friendly.
Hey, guys, I had another comment.
Go ahead, Doug.
It seems that the JB's microphone is the one that comes through the clearest and the loudest. But if I'm hearing everything, basically, the friendly amendment is basically saying that we're not going to accept the recommendation by the review team of implementing North Star, and we're going to basically get those questions answered and continue to look at both the insourcing and outsourcing options. Does that pretty much summarize it?
Yes, that is correct, Doug. That is exactly what the friendly motion is.
And we, along with that, we have a 45-day deliverable. Is that correct?
Correct. Back to the board in 45 days.
And the deliverable is coming from who?
The GM will form a committee, and that committee will bring the recommendation back to the board.
Will that group be put together quick enough to attend the demos on the 13th?
What I want is, I want board working sessions with the GM so that I think it's unfair to JB and his team to send them out as another review group, come back here, and us all of a sudden pepper him with questions. I'll tell you exactly what I want, because I think we can eliminate everybody except North Star and L&M. I want a working session with this board, JB and his staff, and the North Star people where our questions are answered 100%, so this whole chart is flowed out, and so I can sit here and cast a vote based on what the cost is going to be for an end-to-end solution, knowing how we're going to run it, and knowing how much we're going to save. I want to compare that against the same thing from L&N.
Okay, Slobodan?
Thanks, Steve. Just to follow up on what Frank said, the way I envision this really playing out is GM calling a work session and inviting anybody from the board that's available to attend and take part in this. Whether it's, one of us, 5 of us, whoever is available, because time is of the essence, and our schedules are very difficult to sync up where all 7 of us are going to be available. And it's not necessarily mandatory that all 7 of us are available. So in the interest of time, I would suggest we have the GM put together a work session as early as next week, extend the invite to the board. We'll have somebody from the operations. We'll have somebody from the admin, like Steve, Director of Finance, Budget and Finance Committee, anybody from IT that wants to provide their input. We need first a session where we're going to share our notes with each other before we are in front of the vendor, before we ask the vendor tough questions. So I think what we need to do is sync up with our observations, with our reviews, come up with a list of priorities. And then I believe the GM already has a scheduled meeting with a vendor that's coming up in a couple of weeks.
December 14th.
So that's why it's important to have our internal, planning session next week and get synced up on all these issues related to the 2 business models so that we are prepared to sit down with those vendors and ask those tough questions. So that's how I envision this really kind of getting on a fast track.
Yes, it would be an open meeting, I'm sure. Colette?
I agree with Frank's comments, and I'd like to see those incorporated into the friendly amendment. I prefer to have the board on this work group rather than the GM, because the board is the one that's asking for it.
Okay.
Ted? I think I had it reading, the board working with the GM will commit to this, and I can add something in there on open working groups if that would be, give me 2 seconds.
Any other comments while he's getting his 2 seconds?
I just think it's essential that JB and his team, and by the way, it is turned on, and the budget and finance group also be involved. I mean, this has to be a big working session where all the stakeholders ask their questions and get their questions answered.
Gene? Yes, you may. Use the mic, though.
Thank you. For the benefit of Frank and Esther, who are new board members, should there be some type of presentation as to what has been studied, so we're not, and summarize what has been done already by way of 2 years, 2.5 years' work of the TWG group, so that we're not asking questions about those things? Or
I can answer for myself, Gene. Last night, I think JB sent me a document that was 27 pages long. I have probably 40 pages of documents from the TWG that I've asked for and questions that I've asked that have been answered. But there are still questions that are unanswered in there. So I think I have all the information that I need to sit down, go through it, collate it, and go to this working session.
If you...
Okay, Ted?
Okay. Let me go to what Slobodan said, and this is kind of an important thing. The important thing is to get together as a group ahead of time before the vendors come in. make sure that we've talked about anything that's been done that may be asked and answered, okay? And where are we at in filling out where we're at? And then make sure we're all on the same page, because the biggest thing is when that vendor walks out of there should be two things that have happened. One, they've answered all the questions, whether it's satisfactory or not. And two, they've got a list of 3 or 4 that they say we have to go back and come back to you with something on that. But the bottom line is to come out of that with everything answered. And I think it's important when the working group gets together to kind of meld all of this stuff together, including anybody else that may be sitting in there, so that we don't get it out of control. Stay focused to the key points that we need to do, and it's not everybody saying, well, you know, I'd like to have hamburgers come up on the software. So I think that's an important part of it.
Go ahead, Doug.
Let me add something, because Frank, I hear you, but I want to make sure that, you know, I hear a lot of, I still have more questions, okay? There was a lot of information that was prepared and sent over that was that background work, the proposal from the TWG comparing all 4 vendors, the proposal from L&N that basically followed that same chart of listing all the 40 evaluation criteria and whether or not they could meet them. So, you know, if that wasn't enough, what's going to help us out is where are those gaps? Now, Frank, you did thank you for that list of questions that you had put together. They got forwarded over to North Star and say, you know, be prepared to do that. But beyond that, you know, what are the other gaps? What are the other questions? I mean, it's you know, we've talked about it. We have to get to a level of detail so we can accomplish something. To continue to say we have questions, that's fine. You know, the responsibility on all of us is to say, what are those questions, and how do we get them to the resources that can answer them? So, you know, we have to put, and if you're suggesting that we have to have, you know, another working session, I certainly want to make sure that we use that time wisely, because, you know, we've sort of done all that. So I want to get a sense of how much more is out there that hasn't already been asked and answered, hasn't already been asked but not answered, or hasn't even been asked. So I don't have a sense of that. I think we need to get that before we, you know, declare that we're going to have a work session prior to inviting the vendor in.
I can only answer for myself, Doug, but I can say that if North Star has the list that I most recently sent you and responded to, that unless something comes up in a demonstration that comes out from left field, that I would have no further questions and I'd be prepared to vote.
Okay, any other discussion points? If not, I'm going to ask Ted to reread the friendly amendment.
Hey, this is going to sound funny, but I wish Frank had JB's microphone, because Frank sounds like, you know, like he's in a tunnel somewhere, and I could barely hear. And same thing with Steve as well. But anyway, hey, I get your point. You know, let's get that information together, and if we have to have a work session, so be it. I just want to make sure that if we decide to have a work session, that we use that time productively, because you know, I want to get an understanding of what's not out there that needs to be out there.
Go ahead. We're going to hear the friendly amendment now.
The board, working with the GM, commits to completing all due diligence of solutions to include filling all software holes, pricing, and ancillary areas within 45 days, and bring a recommendation to the full board using open working groups.
Colette?
I'll accept that friendly amendment as stated.
Okay. I'll second it. Okay, so the friendly amendment is accepted. Let's just vote on that. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, now we'll go back to the original motion. We still have to vote on that, or, I mean, as amended. Okay, right, the original motion as amended.
I'll second.
All right, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Great, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the topic is the first reading of changes to resolution F03 and F04 that were presented to me by the Budget and Finance Committee members. On F03, I have listed the changes, but I will go directly to the amendment and verbalize the changes. In paragraph 3C, the wording, including buildings, articles of furniture, vehicles, and equipment having a useful life of over 2 years and an acquisition cost of at least $5,000. Also included are groups of lesser unit cost, but where the number of items results in a substantial total investment of at least $5,000. That wording would be added, and the wording following it, such as facilities, furnishings, and equipment having a useful life of over 2 years and a cost over $1,000 per item, see financial management item, that will be deleted. In section 3D, the following words will be added. Maintenance expenditures from reserves must be major and non-routine in nature. In section 4, items B and C will be deleted, and items D and E will be relabeled. On the next page, under item 5, under what becomes item 4, the following words will be added. For bulkhead maintenance and replacement, a plan schedule should be developed separately for OP-owned bulkheads and privately owned bulkheads. And then the final changes are under item 9, where the dates and the signatories are changed.
Okay, go right on to FO4. This is just a first reading.
Okay.
So
FO4, the first change becomes item 3, policy, I'm sorry. On item 2A, the following words will be added. It's to collect interest, and then the words from the date of delinquency will be added. FO4 is delinquent assessments.
Sorry.
And then under item number 3, 1, the following words will be added after this phrase. With a request for payment, and the words added will be, which will include interest calculated at the annual rate of 20%, will be added. Then on item, still 3, item number 6, the following will be deleted. A review of all delinquent accounts shall be conducted, and the words added, a review meeting including will be added, and then the words the review shall include will be eliminated, and then following on, the director of finance will be added as part of that review, and then the words after supervisor will take place to review the process to determine the effectiveness of the association's current assessment collection strategy and determine what, if any, further action should be taken by the association. That is added. Also, an update will be provided to the, and then the following will be deleted. The purpose of the review is to determine in each case what additional steps should be taken to gain compliance, to provide an update to management, and And then under item number 4, the signatories and the dates will be changed.
any points of clarification that people have?
Quick comment, I know Slobodan's got the same thing. We need to talk about a couple of these as we go forward. It doesn't need to be done today, but we'll come forward on a couple things. For instance, setting the percentage on the thing. And the other thing I want to talk about at some point is whether we use it or not, do we want to leave a new capital reserve in at some point down the line? So those are not for today, but just issues that the board is looking at after this first reading.
Okay. You have a question?
No, just to add to what Ted said, for sake of transparency, the board has already provided a certain amount of feedback to Frank on what we have observed with the proposed changes or deletions, and that's going to be revisited with the two committees that are involved, the Budget and Finance and the Bylaws and Resolutions, before the second reading takes place.
Okay. Let's move on then to Resolution C01, Slobodan. This is related to board liaison.
Thank you, Steve. Just find it. Okay. First reading of proposed changes to Resolution C01. Following is the summary of the proposed changes to Resolution C01, Committee General Policy. I am going to read the actual changes. under paragraph 3B2, which is board committee liaison, the sentence that reads, routine communications between the board and its committee shall be through the committee liaison. This in no way prohibits the chairperson. That entire sentence will be deleted. And the new sentence will read the following. The president of the association shall appoint one or more directors as a liaison to each committee. Chairpersons can have communications with the president at any time the chairperson deems such communications necessary. In the same paragraph, the following additions will take place. Overall board liaison responsibilities, and that's followed by 4 bullets. Facilitate communication between the board and the assigned committees. Ensure that the assigned committee operates within the parameters of their charge function statements. Ensure that the work of the assigned committee stays aligned with the strategic plan, the committee's functions, statement, and the annual committee tasks and/or goals. And a final bullet, foster collaborative working relationships between the staff, committee chair, the board, and committee members. And a 5th bullet, work with the chair to ensure long-term productivity of the assigned committee, including facilitating a smooth transition from the outgoing chair to the incoming one, period.
Okay. Any questions for clarification? Colette?
I'm sorry, the addition of the chairpersons can have communication, does that eliminate the possibility of advisory committee members having communication with the president?
I would have to read the actual resolution, but I believe the communication is only between the chair and the president. That's not being eliminated. That remains as a rule.
So I'm thinking maybe we should just clarify that it is chairpersons only, because I don't believe the resolution says anything about members.
That's correct.
Okay, and then may I make a second comment?
Sure.
The other comment is that I'm wondering if this CL1 should include some language regarding the ethics and conduct issues, conflict of interest and such, that the board and the officers are responsible for adhering to, and just wanted input from you, I guess, as the liaison on that. And let's, decide how we want to address that, if at all.
Okay. So just to make sure I understand, so basically the issue is the notion about the conflict of interest and then the code of ethics that really is covered under I think the new resolution B08. My take on a conflict of interest, and in regard to the C01 resolution that we are talking about, there is already a board-level resolution on a conflict of interest where I think it's, I forgot now whether it's B04 or 5, but it includes the committee members as part of the policy on a conflict of interest, as well as the board members and officers. So I don't think we need to worry about the conflict of interest because the committees are covered under that other resolution. As to the code of ethics, because we already have B08, I think maybe what would be cleaner and simpler if you just modify the B08 to, in addition to board members and officers of the association, to add the word like "and committee members." And that would basically just expand on what's already in place, as opposed to taking all of those code of ethics and building it into the C01. So my suggestion would be you might be better accomplishing the same by just adding a simple 2 words, committee members, to the resolution B08.
Ted?
Yeah, I think we need to fix that one way or the other. But I got 2 things. I think in the foster collaborative between staff, I think that should either say GM or through staff through the GM, because really the board deals with the GM, and to get we wouldn't be actually asking staff to show up. We'd be going to the GM and saying, just so that that's there. And then the last one there, I'd put comma and vice versa, because in most cases, it's the board member who's assigned to the committee that's changing every year or 2 years, and the committee chair is in there for 3 or 4 years. So it's more the committee chair is doing a lot of the, hey, here's where we are and here's what we do, or vice versa, something like that. But we'll screw with this between meetings.
Okay? All right. We're going to move on to appointments. And
make a comment?
Sure, sorry.
Not included in the board packet for this was the appointment that I wanted to add today for Debbie Bennington for Communications Committee. This is her second term, and it would expire in September of 2020, just for the board's information. She would be included in this group of appointments.
Okay, we don't actually vote on these as a board, right? It's
We can
appointed.
vote on them as a group.
As a whole group? They're just appointed.
Unless the board objects.
Right. So, all right, so we're talking about Cheryl Jacobs to, well, I got some other ones. Cheryl Jacobs, first term communications, Cheryl Jacobs, first term clubs, Anne Marie Wolfsheimer, second term aquatics, Kathy Grimes, an extension to aquatics, and then the one that, Debbie Bennington. So there's 5. Any questions? So then we'll appoint all these people to those committees.
Motion to approve.
Okay, second? Good, all right. Okay. Motion to close session.
So moved.
That would be you, Esther. You're on.
Okay, can you hear me? At a meeting of the Board of Directors of Ocean Pines Association held on the first day of December 2018 at 9 a.m. in the Ocean Pines Community Center, the board voted to adjourn to closed session for the purpose of a December 1st, 2018, specifically pertaining to personnel as permitted by the Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Section 11B-111, parenthesis 4, discussion of matters pertaining to employees and personnel.
Is there a second to the motion? Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay.
This is-
Doug will call you back.
I will take a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
The meeting is adjourned.